Hello, my name is Chaplain Ken Sorensen. I'm a division chaplain here at Fort Hood, Texas. And my guest, or the person that I'm sitting with, is Doug Dietert, who's the author of A Vast Simplicity, a book that he put out last year, but he needs folks to know about it. So first, we're going to spend some time today just finding out a little bit more about Doug. And Doug, I just wanted to ask you, Pastor Doug Dietert, your faith background and history of how you ended up writing a book about the Zion Faith Homes.
Okay. Thank you, Ken. And I grew up in a Christian home, at least half Christian. My dad wasn't a believer, but my mom was. And I've been going to church since I was old enough to remember, and blended my life with Jesus' life when I was very young. And I told the Lord that I would do whatever He wanted with the rest of my life. A little bit more of a story than that behind it, but I did surrender to the Lord's will. And so I grew up in a Pentecostal denomination. I've heard some wonderful men of God in my lifetime. And especially as I was young, had a wonderful Sunday school teacher who guided me and became an example for me, even though my father wasn't a believer. So my background stretches way back as far as I can remember. And by God's grace, I've continued to follow the Lord the rest of my life.
You mentioned that you went to Harvard for college or for schooling. Tell me about your experiences at Harvard.
Okay. Well, through the Lord's providence, I visited the campus of Harvard when I was, I guess I was 17. My brother had gone to MIT, was getting a degree in electrical engineering, and the school was nearby Harvard. So he took me up there, and while I was on the campus there, the Lord just spoke to me and said, "This is where you're supposed to come." And so when I was a senior, I applied, and I somehow knew I would get in, which I did. And the Lord blessed me with a good memory. I'm really not that smart, but I had a good memory, and the Lord helped me to go there and get a degree in mathematics.
Now, you mentioned that you were involved with the Billy Graham crusade that came to Harvard and your involvement with that. I'm just curious about things that you did there.
Well, I joined the InterVarsity group there, InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, and I was one of the officers there. And we got it in our heads that we wanted Billy Graham to come and hold a few meetings at Harvard. We could see the need. And somehow he and his staff agreed to do it. And so I was part of the group that brought Billy Graham to Harvard. And I was the treasurer, so I was included in the discussions with him. And I found great joy in meeting that man. And it affected me to see a man of integrity at that age who had no scandals attached to his name and so on. I was very grateful for that example. And we had a successful 4-day crusade at Harvard.
But after graduating from Harvard, you went off to Brooklyn Teen Challenge and your experiences there.
Actually, I first went to a seminary in Missouri for a year, and it was there that Dave Wilkerson, who was the head of Teen Challenge, came and was asking for young people to consecrate, to spend some time working on the staff there. And I felt the Lord told me to go there. So I went there single, and I worked in the prison ministry there. That was my first assignment. I've been in every jail in New York City, but never overnight. And I taught the new converts class and did other things there and worked in the magazine. And so I became acquainted with Dave Wilkerson. I got married while I was at Teen Challenge, and my wife was his secretary for a period of time. So we knew Dave personally. And again, God put in my life a man of integrity. I suppose most viewers would know that Dave only passed away a few years ago. And his reputation as the pastor of Times Square Church has gone around the world. So I'm blessed to have met a man like him at Teen Challenge.
But there was the chaplain at Teen Challenge during that time was?
Leonard Ravenhill.
Yeah. And how was your relationship with him during that time?
I actually became closer to Leonard Ravenhill than I did to Dave Wilkerson. He took an interest in a couple of us young men that were there, and he became a personal friend of ours. And I visited him in his home several times and helped, actually I helped edit one of his books. Because of my background, he thought I could be a useful editor for him. And so I did work on his articles and books. And I guess I should emphasize again, Ken, that he had a tremendous influence on me, because there I am with another senior elder man of God with tremendous respect. And I had an example to follow. And I'm very grateful that God ever put me in touch with Leonard Ravenhill. His biography had just came out a couple of years ago. And I was asked to contribute to that biography, which I was happy to do, because I knew him so well. Yes, thank you.
Now, you move from Brooklyn Teen Challenge, high energy, David Wilkerson, Leonard Ravenhill. All of a sudden, you find yourself moving to Zion, Illinois, January of '67.
Yes.
You moved to Zion, Illinois, to the Zion Faith Homes. The shift alone, you know, to move from prison ministry, Bible study teacher, sitting under Leonard Ravenhill and David Wilkerson, to Zion Faith Homes.
It was a big switch, and I remember the first time we drove to the Zion Faith Homes, I said, Lord, what are you doing? I've gone to school in Boston. I've worked in New York City. I grew up outside of Chicago, and you're sending me to this tiny little country town called Zion, Illinois. And I had really very little knowledge of the Zion Faith Homes, although David Wilkerson knew of the Zion Faith Homes and knew that I was going there. And though it was a small work, it had a worldwide influence. And I didn't know much about it. I didn't know they had a training program. I just knew that it was a place of prayer and consecration and what we used to call in those days deep life teaching. And I agreed almost unknowingly to move there, and did not know that I would spend almost 30 years there, both as a student and as a minister. But that is the reason why I could write a book like this called The Vast Simplicity,
which is just striking in its depth, and what you share in here about the Zion Faith Homes. And we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. But during your 30 years there, you mentioned being involved in the Ministerial Association and being involved in setting up Mayor's Prayer Breakfast and stuff. You care to elaborate on that? Just during your 30 years, that just seemed like a highlight for you.
All right. I'm going to answer that question by reading a verse from 2 Corinthians 11:3, Ken, which describes, in a sense, the atmosphere into which I found myself when I went into the faith homes. And that verse is Paul saying to the Corinthians, I fear lest somehow, as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, so your minds may be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. And I had grown up in Pentecostal circles, and I felt I had a pretty good knowledge of the Bible, and there was quite a push for us all to get educated and so on. But I had never encountered such simplicity as I encountered in the faith homes, but it was centered in Jesus himself. And as we're able to talk a little bit more, I'll enlarge on that. But that simplicity affected me when I enrolled as a trainee there, so much so that I remember saying to myself at one point, Lord, it would be a privilege if I could stay here as a student, an intern, for 10 years, because I realized there was a depth in Jesus that I didn't know. But the people who were responsible for conducting the training program and running these homes, they knew Jesus in a way that intrigued me and drew me. And I wanted to know the Lord like that. Leonard Ravenhill had given me a copy of the autobiography of Madame Guyon in French. Some people know that book. Millions of copies have been sold, but Moody Press had published a simple little paperback edition. I read it, and I just said, Jesus, if I could know you like that, I would pay any price. And then so he put me in a place where I could know him like that. But as time went on, I realized this simplicity was not simple-minded. It was a vast simplicity.
Hence the title of the book.
That's the title of the book. And then the Lord trained me in those ways. And then after 6 years, the Lord said to the other ministers, it's God's will for Doug to be a minister here with us. And so I was put into the ministry there and served as a minister in that place for another 20-some years. Eventually, I became one of the main leaders there and speakers there. But I never got to the bottom. I'm still not at the bottom yet of this knowledge of Jesus that Paul was afraid we would slip away from. And that's what drew me to write a book like this.
Well, it sounds, what I'm hearing you, because a lot of the stuff that we're talking about is stuff we're discussing in a little bit different format. I've known you for 22 years, but there's still things I'm learning as we go through this. And it seems what I hear you saying is God preparing you by helping you meet men of godly character, really phenomenal men of God, to prepare you and let you see what right looks like. And suddenly you find yourself in the Zion Faith homes and you're saying, okay, people of godly character, people of character, people that know the Lord, like Billy Graham, like David Wilkerson, like Leonard Ravenhill, only people that you wouldn't see out in the press, out in the media, but yet had the Lord, had Jesus Christ as central to their lives. And that's what drew you.
Yeah, that's so true, Ken, because as I said, my father, actually he became a believer when he was 81, my natural father, thank God. But he didn't know the Lord, and I didn't have examples at home, male examples particularly. But God put them in my life, and they were men of tremendous depth and influence, and the hunger was created by that. And then to be brought to a place where that hunger could be somewhat satisfied, you know, that's been a tremendous factor in my life. And
because you're working with young kids right now, I'm just going to mention this. You're working with college-age kids right now, discipling them, working with them, and you're seeing this hunger in them, you know, and offering them just the scriptures, offering them a simplicity in Jesus, and letting them have that hunger be satisfied bit by bit as they get to know Jesus more and more. And that hunger that's in you is then being placed in them or encouraged in them. An outgrowth, but a hunger that began in the faith homes.
So actually even I had an experience with God when I was 12 that made me know that I should seek the Lord with all my heart. And God gave me Matthew 6:33, seek the kingdom of God first and his righteousness. But Ken, the way I would put it is this: I'm one link in a very long chain. So are you.
Yes.
And God forges those links, and anybody with a sincere heart to know Jesus will find himself in one of those chains with many links. And I'm just privileged to have been a part of that. And then I can include these young people that I'm helping to train, they're also links. And God never stopped that linkage from Jesus himself through the disciples and right straight through the dark ages and everything. All the history of the church, there's always been a chain of men who knew God and women who knew God. And I feel so privileged to be part of that chain, don't you?
Oh, yeah. But that's, I think this book lays out a whole bunch of, not a whole bunch, a small group, a cast of ministers that consecrated themselves, that identified that hunger as a hunger for Jesus and pursued it with everything within them.
Yes.
And you're a link to help pull us in to that chain, tie us into that chain.
I want to be, and it's the only reason I'm willing to kind of talk about the book a little bit, because I realize that many of today's generation don't realize the heritage that is ours, and the men of God that are still ours, and the possibility of knowing Jesus so deeply. I don't want that lost. There are young people who have seen through the artificial life that's being offered them, and they want something real. And that's where I come in. And I might mention that in the early part of that book, I trace the history of the church somewhat that would lead to the formation of the Zion Faith Homes, connecting it again with a larger picture of what God is doing in the world today. I'm not ashamed of that.
Doug, thanks for sharing that. And folks, it's really important, and we're going to continue this next time in our discussion about vast simplicity. Reverend Doug Dietert, thank you.